mine above Wallsburg, Utah. Back in the early 1900s, I would say not the real early, but you know, what we would call early for us. There was a man that ran a concrete crew for Provo City, and his name was what? Well, he was pouring a patch of sidewalk somewhere, unknown place, but in the Provo area, and he had a dark complected guy come up to him and say, "I need a job. Can you give me a job?" And he said, "What can you do?" And he says, "I can do any kind of labor you want." He says, "I can't finish concrete, but I can learn." And he said, "Well, come back tomorrow and I'll let you know." So he thought it over. He decided, yeah, I could use another laborer, good ones. The ones I got aren't worth that much. So he thought he was a Spaniard. So when this guy came back, he told him, "You're hired." He said, "When do you want me to start?" "Right now," he said. "Have you got clothes on that you can work in the dirt?" He said, "Yeah, I can wear these." So they give him a rake and a shovel and told him, "I want you to work with the guys that's forming these places we got to pour with concrete, and they'll tell you what you got to do." So they taught him how to level the dirt out and tamp it so that they could pour concrete, which they did. He worked for a couple of weeks, and he told the guy, "You know," he says, "you're the best laborer I've ever had." He says, "I'm going to give you a raise." So he liked that. He gave him a raise. But he worked for a few more weeks, and he was saving every penny that he could save. And he came back to, he said, "I've been up here for a year before this year, and all this year." And he said, "What are you doing up here?" He says, "I'm looking for a gold mine that was operated by my family." And he says, "You have a map to it?" And he says, "Yeah, I got a map right here," he said. Anyway, the Spaniard said, "I've got to quit, and I'd like to have you come in as a partner, if you would, so that I could go up and rent a place to stay close enough to this place I'm looking for that I can make a lot more progress." And he said, "Well, show me a map and I'll consider it." He said, "Well, I'll show you right now." So they was of course pouring concrete. He took them off to the side where the sandy area was, and he got it smooth, and then he took his finger and he started drawing things that valley and making a small turn when you got to the top. And he says, on that trail he put what we called chicken tracks, like a V, and the point was going up, and the two going down was you was walking up. And he said there was chicken tracks going all the way up to a black dot. What he considered black, the Spaniard had got some dirt and put it there in the sand and kind of just pushed it down with his hand. And he said, in this round area, he drew one or two birds with long legs. And he said, I've seen them in the valley where this place is. And he said, well, I know where you are now. Where? He says, you're just up the canyon, up Provo Canyon going up, and there's a road that takes you off to the right to a big round valley. And he says, that's called Wallsburg. And he said, yep, that's right. Would you be interested in financing me so I could have meals and a place to stay while I'm up there looking? And he said, yep, I'll finance you. He said, how much do you need to get going? He said, well, I'd like $10 in quarters if you can give me that much. He said, yeah, that's no problem. But money was worth a lot of money back then.
Yeah, so you're talking the 20s or 30s?
And quarters, nickels, dimes were very sought after, you might say, for sale. Anyway, Norm went to the bank and got him a roll of silver dollars. Silver quarters, and it was $10 worth. Gave it to him. He said, I'm counting on you, buddy, that all this is the truth. He said, it is. It was my family. And when I find a place, I will recognize it from what they've told me. So he said that the Spaniard took off, and he says, as you're leaving Wallsburg to go up to Little Valley, he said there was a ranch there, and he said the Spaniard went over to talk to the rancher, and he said, I'm wondering if you will rent me a place to stay for the rest of the summer and feed me one meal a day. And he says, yeah. He said, I'd do that. How much are you willing to pay? He said, I'll give you a quarter for, I don't know if it was for a certain period of time or per day or what, but probably a week or something like that. Him and the guy that owned the ranch agreed, and they shook hands on it. He gave him his first quarter and went up and started hunting. Then he would come back at night in time for the evening supper meal at this guy's ranch. So he ate plenty, big meal. He said then he kept some pieces of bread and different things like that in a sack, so he might be able to have a snack or two while he was working during the day. Well, this went on all summer, and he would come back, give the guy the quarter, go up and hunt. Finally, the Spaniard came back to the guy that owned the ranch, and he said, I'm leaving. So he stayed there for however long his money lasted him that he'd earned working there in Provo. And finally he gave up, and the farmer said to him, he says, if you tell me, I might be able to help you. What have you been looking for? And he said, well, I've been looking for a place that my father and mother and the family worked in a mine. And I can't find not even a sign of anything up there. I must be in the wrong place. But he says, let me draw you a map. So the Spaniard got down where there was a sandy area and cleaned it all off nice and clean. And then he took his finger and he drew a lake, and he drew a fish in it, and he drew a canyon that went up, made a turn, and then he made, there was another trail that came up into a round canyon. And he said, from there, it went through the bottom of the canyon, and he said there was a lot of birds in there with long legs, and they were walking in water. Well, that's some egrets, I think, that's here in Utah. Well, anyway, he said that it showed the trail going through the area where the farmers were farming and up a canyon and to a X for the mine. Are you out of tape? Mm-mm. Oh, all right. Anyway, he said that I've been up there looking for that. He told this farmer, I can't find anything. He said, well, I don't recognize anything like that up there either. He may have not told the Spaniard the truth, you know, but I don't know. Anyway, he went back to Provo and he contacted this guy, and he said, have you got time to talk to me after work tonight? And he said, yeah. He thought he was going to ask for his job back, you know. This guy that was pouring the concrete for Provo didn't think any more of it after that. Well, there was a guy named Meekum that had come out there, and he knew the guy's name that was pouring the concrete out there. So one day he said that he had 2 horses back up in Wallsburg, and he said somehow they got loose. And he says, we hunted and hunted down there in that valley and we couldn't find it, but he says there's a canyon that goes right up there. And he said, so I took off to go up to see if one of my prize horses was up there, he said, and I took up to see if I could find it. And he said, so I looked and looked all day long, I couldn't see nothing, but he said there was a mountain right there, or a hill. I don't know what he was directly looking at, but he said there was a hill there, and he said I walked up on it, and when I got on top, right on top, he said I could overlook everything up there. And he said that place was called Little Valley. And he said I looked and I looked with binoculars everywhere and I couldn't see anything. He said, but all of a sudden I noticed off to my right I could feel some cool air hitting me on the cheek. And I turned around and he said there was rocks piled there, sealing a hole. So he said I pulled all them rocks away and looked down in there. I didn't have a light with me, but he said I looked down in there and it looked like it dropped about 20 feet. And it was a big natural cavern type hole in there, huge, he said. You could tell just how dark it was and everything. So he said he went back to Provo to talk to this guy because he knew he had some money. And he went down and shook hands with him, and they'd heard of each other. But anyway, he says, would you be interested in a mine, looking for a mine and helping me? And he says, nope, not unless you're in one spot. So he took that pencil that he had on the table and he drew it on a piece of paper. And he said, why, you son of a so-and-so. He says, you stole my mine from me. He said, that's right where I'm at. He recognized the drawing, and he said he had a photographic memory. He drew that thing just picture perfect. His boys told me he could draw it any day of the week and draw it exactly the same. So he said that the guy pouring the concrete figured if he was there and that Spaniard drew that map for him in the sand, that has to be the same place.
Yeah.
So he told Meekum, yeah, I'll put up the money and let's get some digging going up here. So they got some lights and fires, and there was holes going all over inside, and they was covered with sand. Now, it was probably natural, the type that I've seen. And he started digging these holes out to see if they went anywhere. And they had found the boys had found a sign down in Provo, big, huge metal sign. And he said, you don't know how many piles of sand I pulled out of there on that piece of metal and dumped it so we could get into wherever we was digging. And I said, yeah, I can imagine. Well, they dug for years, and they had taken a partner in to get some money. And so gradually, there was him and another one they had, and he gradually started buying these guys out, the guy from Provo, because he did have some money. So he bought those two out, and then he bought Meekum out. And so there was just him and the three boys. So they didn't have a girl, a sister to cook for them. So anyway, they dug and dug and dug until they finally quit. And there was only one place that I seen that was left in there. But let me tell you a story that is part of this.
Okay.
He had a wife that was kind of not photogenic mind, but kind of had the ability to see things like these mind readers and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Well, one day her husband said to her, I've got to go to so-and-so, and I'll be back tomorrow. So that night she had a dream, and it was just clear as a bell, she said. Well, eventually she told me the story. I won't tell you what. The boys told me she'd had a vision, that's all they knew.
Yeah.
So she was telling me what I'm telling you, that the husband came home and she said to him, where have you been? And he told her, and he says, you liar, you son of a gun and liar. He said, I'll tell you where you've been. She described the house, the fence around it, how high it was, what color it was, everything about it. And she said, I don't know who was in that house, but you shouldn't have been there, I'll tell you that. Might have been an old girlfriend or what, you know.
Yeah.
He never told another lie, I understand, to his wife.
Huh.
Well, shortly after they got me involved, they knew I knew stuff about the Josephine.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought that was the Josephine. I don't know why, but they did.
Ah.
The one they was looking for.
Yeah.
Well, they was talking to their mother one day, and she says, let me tell you boys something. I had a vision, and I had a guy come here and to take me with him. And she said to him, where are you taking me? And she said, I'll show you. We'll be there in just a few minutes. So he held his hand out. She knew she had to touch it. And when she did, she said her spirit left her body and went with him. And so they went up to this hole. At that time, it didn't matter whether there was a hole there or not, they could go through it, like I did that time. Well, they went through the hole, and it lit up in there. He had the power to make it light, I guess, I don't know. They didn't light any fire, but she said it was a huge cavern in there. And he said, see this pile of dirt, this black dirt? She says, yes. She says, you'll have to go through that. It'll have to be dug out. When you get it dug out, she says, he took me through a tunnel down to the bottom, and there was 2 piles of bars covered with skins that he showed me. Some silver bars and some gold bars. And they'd been covered with deer skins. And she said that down, we went a little further in, and he pointed back in the canyon to her, back in the hole. He says, right down there in the bottom is where they were digging in that black rock. She says, now remember what I've told you. She says, you'll have a man come to your house, and when you do, you better recognize that's the person you want. So she told me the story, and then she got a hold of the boys, and she says, you know, that guy named June that you hired to come and help you on this mine, you better listen to what he has to say. But they wouldn't. Mm. The mother had bought them an instrument that they hooked to a battery in it, send out a signal through the air, and they used, of course, dowsing rods, which makes them cross. But they said, it's right back there in the south. And I hadn't invented my instruments yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, I said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, we're going to dig a tunnel. And I said, well, I can help you for a little while, but I'm not going to stay here for forever. And they said, why? Aren't you going to help longer than that? And I didn't tell them how long. I just said I couldn't stay forever. Well, anyway, the mountain was tipped this way, and the formation was going from the bottom here up to the east side. And I said, let me tell you what you're doing. You're going to go through these rocks, and you get over here 70 feet, and you'll be on the outside. Because you want to go down, not... Well, I couldn't talk him out of digging. Leo wanted to dig, but anyway, So we started the tunnel. We got they had a brother that had a generator, and I can't remember what else he had, but he had the main thing we needed for compressors, you know, for air guns and for jackhammer. Well, I had 2 jackhammers, and I had a bunch of stuff in that trailer I told you I had that was stolen.
Yeah.
Anyway, we dug a tunnel there 70 feet back in there. And then I says, you know, you're doing it all wrong. It's going the wrong way, and I don't care what your mother brought you. I got to go home. I got a business to run, I said.
Yeah.
They got mad at me because I wouldn't stay. And then they sent me a bill for $3,300
Wow.
for helping them.
Really?
Yeah. I said, you sent me a bill for $3,300, and I said, but you let your brother bring a compressor here and didn't charge him nothing. Well, he's our brother. I thought we was all brothers. We're told that in the Bible, I said. You get in a lot of crazy things.
So that's where they found the bone map inside there?
Yeah. When they was first digging in the mine, there was piles of where people had burned timbers or something to either cook on or light or for heat. I don't know. And they said they went through them piles and they found that bone map, that was about that big around. And it had 104 notches around it. And it had 3 holes in it. And when they first found it, they called George Thompson. And they said, George, can we bring a bone to you and show it to you? And see if you can tell us what it means? And he said, sure. So they took it to George, and he looked at it, and he said, I'm sorry, boys, I can't help you. He says, I can't make heads or tail out of that map, if it's a map. And they said, well, we think it's a map. They said, is there anybody you know that can look at this and maybe give us an idea of what it is? He said, there's only one guy I know that can look at maps and decipher them. They said, who's that? And he says, well, I won't tell you. But if you want me to call him for you, and if he's willing to look at it, I'll let you know. So George come up and explained to me what he had. I said, well, I wouldn't mind looking at that map. Or bone map, they called it. So they brought it. Like I say, it was about 3 inches thick, you might say, about that big around. And it had 104 notches cut in that bone all the way around it, which I think were vara measurements. 33.5 inches for each cut. Then it had 2 holes, and they looked like they'd had something in them because they was worn. And it had what looked like, the front of it looked like a ladder. But I couldn't really make a good interpretation of it, so I called them and told them, meet me up at Denny's and come back and get your bone map. And they got there, and I explained to them, I said, you know, I just can't figure out what's going on there because of the way it's put together. But I says, I think it has something to do with something here, but I can't really help you. So they took their map and went, and then I got home, and that night I started thinking about it, thought, and so I thought, something's telling me to give them a call, tell them to bring that map back to me. So I called them and told them, I need that thing again. I I want to look it over real careful. So they brought it back to me. I kept it for about a week, I guess, and finally figured it out. And that ladder was a ladder that went in that hole that Meekums threw the rocks off of. And you had to get up on top of the hill and come down to it. There's no way to go up to it. So that had to be a ladder going in that hole. And then there was 2 more holes away from it, which indicated tunnels to me inside. One of them, which would be the one that the lady told me the guy took her to. And that, that was black dirt. One different color, like regular was. Well, I called them back and I told them what I thought them marks were there is, and that was a map, and that I figured there was 2 tunnels inside. And from then, I don't know, they must have made some phone calls. Somehow they figured out that I had the map to the Josephine. And like I say, they figured they had it. And I said, well, have you got a barren knoll? And he says, yeah, there's one there. And I said, is it covered with foliage? And he said, well, right off of it is. He says, it's got skunkweed all over it. I said, okay. I said, well, those are the only thing you could have that would interest me. I'll go up and look at it. So they told me how to get there. I went up there. That skunkweed was 2 or 3 feet high, really thick. And I got up there and there was a bare knoll, but there wasn't anything that is described, you know. And so I come back and told them, you don't have the Josephine. There's one down in the Henry Mountains, I said, that is called Josephine. And the guy was up there and he cut a board out of the top that has La Josephine de Martinique written in it. And Keith wanted to give me his address to go down and look at that bone. I mean that head rail they'd cut out of that mine. And I said, well, if that was the Josephine and he found the one in the Henrys, he'd be rich now. But I don't know whether he's rich or not. So anyway, that was the story of that bone map. They found it in a pile of burned stuff. And white people don't burn that, but an Indian would. Kill the Spaniards off. You know, the first day we was there, me and my friend went up the road, and Cecil come back with a rock, and he says, what's this? And I said, well, that's decomposed hematite in there. And I said, them square holes in the rock get decomposed and gets it in the material below it, and you get ore in it if it's been deposited. And so he showed it to these guys, and he said, I'll be damned, we've been up here for 20 years, and these guys come up, and then one day they find something that might have gold in it. It was funnier than hell. Anyway, we went on up, and before we went up, there's 2 trees, one across the other from the other, and they've got oral written on them.
I've seen them trees.
Did you see them?
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah.
Well, they'd never seen them, paid any attention to them.
Oh.
And there's 2 trees with oral written on them and some other stuff. Well, we went on up to the top, and there was a number of trees there. One of them said, La Herba de Oro. Can't remember the exact. But anyway, it said land of, another one in Spanish said land of the yellow gold.
Huh.
Did you see them?
Uh-uh.
They're at the top.
Oh.
Well, I don't know. I left there and they finally give it up. Like I say, they wouldn't listen to me about what their mother had told me. So I just left, and I know that they stayed there for a long time, and then finally I learned that they give it up. All they'd had to do is file assessment work every year.
You think there's anything in there?
Huh?
You think there's anything in there?
Yeah.
Do you?
Them trees wouldn't be there. Land of the yellow gold.
Yeah. Well, I know that
La Herba de Oro, you know.
I went in there and crawled through a small hole one year, and then a lot of years later I went back and there was a big tunnel.
There was what?
A big tunnel going in around the side of it. A big tunnel, but it was filled with water. It was clear full of water.
Well, we could have had a...
But I was in there one year when it wasn't full of water.
That was towards the back?
Yeah.
Yeah, we dug that tunnel.
Yeah.
That's the one we dug. And it was full of water?
Yeah, one year when I went there. That might have been in '83 when we had all the floods. Could have been in '83.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have. Well, that went back then a long way. So it had a lot of water seepage coming through them cracks.
Huh.
But the one that the guy showed the lady was a black dirt. You got to go through that dirt, he said, right there.
Huh.
It was right at the beginning of the tunnel. The one up here. You probably went up and went in the side. Did you see the white rats?
The white rats? No.
Oh yeah, there's a colony of them in there. They're just pure white.
So the first time I went in, you had to crawl in on your belly, went in, and it opened up into a big room. But then there, around to the side, and I didn't know it was you, but there was a big tunnel that had been driven in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one I told you I stayed and helped them dig. And it was on the west side going in.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
That's been a long time. That was I think in the 80s. Was that in the 80s when you did that?
Huh?
Was that in the 80s when you did that? I think it was the 80s when I went there. I think it was.
What'd you go there for?
Somebody took me up there and showed me it and told me it was a Spanish tunnel and told me about the bone map was found in there and all that. It was before I knew you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was before I knew you.
And you can't remember you were somebody, huh?
Oh, the person that took it was a lady. Her name was Patty Giles. Patty Giles?
How old was she?
Oh, she was probably 10 years older than me.
Oh, young. Well, yeah, we put a lot of work in that. Jackhammering and blasting and then mucking it out. Taking the pry bar and prying the ceiling, make sure there wasn't nothing loose up there.
Yeah.
I found some wire silver inside of the tunnel he was digging.
Really?
I seen something shiny go across the pile they was dumping. And I said, hold it, don't dump anymore. And I went out on the pile and pulled out this rock about that big. It had pure wire silver running through it.
Really?
I went in that tunnel and looked all over trying to see where that piece come out of.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Couldn't find it, huh? Huh.
No. But it was enough that you could see it.
Wow.
Anyway, one of the brothers says, let me look at that. And he took it, and I never seen it again. It was his after I showed him. Yeah.
Well, Jude, thank you for sharing these stories.